education, interaction, understanding. This is APAC, Australia's public affairs channel.
Well, welcome. It's a real pleasure to be here at Ferguson's Australia, a great South Australian seafood exporting business, with my ministerial colleagues, Senator Anne Ruston and Andrew and his family here at this site. We're here because this business, like many others in South Australia, are struggling with the issue of rising power bills and also the stability of the system. Andrew pointed out that they had nearly $1 million worth of lobster in those tanks. Was the power to go out? Those lobsters would last little more than 30 minutes, and that would be an enormous cost to the business. So as a result of the instability in the South Australian energy system, they've been forced to upgrade their generators, and they've also seen their power bills double over the last 12 months alone. So it really is a challenge to stabilise the system here and to generate affordable power. That's why we're engaging with key stakeholders. I met yesterday with the Energy Minister Tom Koutsantonis and earlier today with the opposition leader Stephen Marshall. I'd ask Anne to say a few words and then over to Andrew.
Yeah. Look, thanks, Minister. And I suppose the irony of the situation is that we've worked so hard to establish fantastic export markets into Asia, not just for our seafood but for all of our products. And we find now that the reliability of our energy source is actually preventing us from taking advantage of what has been an amazing effort over the last 3 years. You know, a business like Ferguson's, which is a huge employer in South Australia, but particularly in regional South Australia, they have properties at Port Macdonald and at Port Lincoln, and they're part of the regional network that supports our great fishing industry. So it is absolutely imperative that we fix up our energy cost and reliability problems, and it's fantastic that the Minister should be here today seeing firsthand of the importance of this particular sector and the importance of making sure that our energy problems are fixed up, and they're fixed up now.
Thanks, Anne. Andrew?
Into the middle, is that all right?
Sure. Sorry.
It's a little bit cozy.
Look, just as the ministers say, that we are running we have a very perishable product here, and it is highly important that we have reliability around power issues. And when we're putting so much risk every day with running a business in South Australia. So. Yeah, look, I'm really keen to lock some pressure off in that area. It would be good for us to have, be sure that we do have reliable power sources.
Andrew, what's power bills like at the moment? Have they gone up?
Yeah, well, in the last few months they have probably doubled. I think I was talking to our CFO about that before, and yes, we've doubled. We've now taken steps. SA Power Network's taken on solar, so all our sites are going over to solar to try and stem that. But it's costly to do that as well.
So Andrew, can you increase what it's gone from and to?
What in dollar terms? Look, a site like this is $100,000 a year, but over 100 before. It's probably 200,000 now.
So that's a $100,000 increase in a year.
Yes.
And what about the other two sites?
Port Macdonald's a bit larger than this, so it's probably gone up a little bit more. But look, across 3 export sites, we'd be, probably gone to something like $600,000 a year.
So Andrew, can you tell us how perilous is it if we, for instance, the major blackout we had statewide, and even the other outages we have, what's at risk here, and what timeframes are we talking about?
We are limited with our timeframe. We've got a generator here, as you saw, that does kick in, and we get that service regularly. We've really upped our service times on that, but there's always a chance it doesn't start. So I've got, depending on how full the tanks are, depending how hot it is, there's lots of other impacting things. So we've got probably 30 minutes. I live 30 minutes away, so if something doesn't start, we're in a fair bit of strife if it doesn't kick in.
So that's oxygenating the water?
Yes, oxygenating the water. They rely on the oxygen now to live, and if they're high density, and it depends on the density of the lobsters in the tanks, but that sort of impacts as well. So,
sorry, does the power situation, either the lack of a reliability, which I'm assuming that's what you're saying, and the high cost, those together, do you sleep at night?
Sometimes not. Yeah, no, look, look, we're living on a knife edge at sometimes, yes. It is with that sort of risk. Yeah, I'd love to lessen the risk in that area.
And that's why this power issue is so important, because this is a real life lived experience by a family-owned business that employs more than 80 South Australians, and as Anne pointed out, in regional South Australia. And the Prime Minister was recently in Port Lincoln, and he heard firsthand from the fishermen about how they're having to have diesel generators because they can't rely on the grid. Now, diesel generators are much more polluting than Jay Weatherall's wind farms and solar plants. And the point is, we can't have an ideological approach to this issue. We have to have a practical one. We have to be technology neutral, and that's why, whether it's coal, whether it's gas, or whether it's renewables, they all have a role to play. But having 50% renewable energy targets and going head rushing into these decisions without understanding the impact that they are having on households and businesses like Ferguson's Australia is reckless in the extreme.
Minister, who's going to be agnostic? Does that mean you'll stick to whatever Finkel recommends when he comes out with his review of the market?
Well, the Finkel review is going to be very important, and as you know, we commissioned him to do this report through the COAG Energy Council, and his primary concern is with the stability of the system. He's already telling us as ministers there are things that we can do to stabilise the system in the short term, and we've worked with the state government here in South Australia and the Australian Energy Market Operator, for example, to get 2 synchronous baseload operators now in South Australia on at any one time. Previously that wasn't the case. Now, you don't have any more coal since the closure of the Northern Power Station, but you do have gas, and that's very important here in South Australia. We're also relieving some of the pressure that is on the Hayward interconnector, which provides power from Victoria into South Australia, which can hopefully stabilise the system. And some of those wind farms hadn't provided their regulatory settings to our energy market operator, which meant that they couldn't ride through some of the disturbances that we saw last September when you had that statewide blackout. They're all things that have now been done, which can help stabilise the system. But we need to do a lot more, and that's what I've discussed with both Tom Koutsantonis and with Stephen Marshall, because we don't need ideology anymore, we need practical outcomes. And yes, it's all right to have renewables, but not at the costs of the businesses in South Australia, the jobs in South Australia, and the household bills which have continued to rise.
Minister, who's going to fund clean coal?
Well, obviously this is going to have to be a partnership in the future between industry and government, and we are looking at all our options. But what we've seen across Asia is the take-up of these high-efficiency, low-emission power plants. There are more than 700 of them in our region. A country like Japan has 90 of them, and they've committed to building another 45. I myself visited one of these coal-fired power stations that used New South Wales and Queensland coal in Yokohama. And these are very important in reducing emissions. More than 40% of emissions can be reduced by this new technology. Importantly, it's baseload power, because the problem you have in South Australia is you rely so heavily, more than 40% of your power comes from wind and solar, so that when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, power's not being generated. And this clean coal technology can hopefully provide baseload power just as gas does and hydro does.
How long will it take then to build some of these factories, and how many of them, these power plants?
Oh, look, we're working through all of those issues, but as the Prime Minister indicated, money has been spent, more than $500 million in Australia since 2009 on research and demonstration plants into clean coal and carbon capture and storage. But we don't have any of these ultra supercritical plants here that we've seen throughout the region. We have supercritical plants, but not ultra supercritical plants. So this is why we have to take the ideology out of it. The Labor Party, Bill Shorten, he wants to close down coal-fired power station. His own Energy Minister, Mark Butler, a member here for Port Adelaide, has said, let's kickstart the closure of coal-fired power stations. Well, given what you've seen in South Australia, that's not a very good outcome.
Minister, how can the tax-paying public have faith in either federal or state governments when you're here actively promoting coal? The state government here denounces that, and the state Liberal leader here doesn't want unconventional gas.
Well, that's actually not right. the state Liberal leader has said he supports unconventional gas extraction from the Cooper Basin, Eromanga Basin. That's where most of the
Pretty
power
limiting
is.
that, though. What
Well,
about the southeast?
Well, we've said we don't want any moratoriums or bans. We've been very
he's
clear
wrong.
about that.
Stephen Marshall's got it wrong?
No, what I've said is we would like no moratoriums and bans, whether they're in South Australia, Victoria, Northern Territory or Tasmania, where they currently exist. What we do want is more gas extraction, because that can lead to more jobs. And I'm pleased that Stephen Marshall does support unconventional gas extraction
Not
in Cooper and
southeast,
Eromanga.
not in the southeast, and that's an important part of the state.
Well, the majority of it here is in Cooper and Eromanga basins.
So has he got it wrong, is what I'm asking.
Well, what I'm saying to you is I would call upon all governments and all oppositions to support unconventional gas extraction on a case-by-case basis. We're very conscious that there are sensitivities around agriculture and there are sensitivities around the environment.
So you
we
want
can
to
take that
lift
into
the
account.
moratorium in the southeast?
Well, I'd like to see all moratoriums across the country.
So him in particular?
He's the opposition. He's the opposition.
He might be in government this time next year.
And I hope he
your
is.
party.
And I hope he is.
And is your party, so would you like to see him lift that moratorium in the southeast?
I would like to see all moratoriums and bans across Australia lifted, because more gas is good for jobs and it's good for energy security and
so
supply.
yes, Stephen Marshall's got it wrong on that score.
Let me say, Stephen Marshall understands better than Jay Weatherall the need for stable, affordable energy in South Australia. I had a very productive discussion with Stephen Marshall today.
Have you embarrassed him a bit by your comments about moratorium should be lifted?
I think Stephen Marshall understands better than the Labor government, who have been in power for 15 years. For 15 years, longer than Caesar ruled Rome, the Labor Party has ruled over South Australia, and we've got this crisis, this embarrassment, this failed experiment here in South Australia. And it's time that Jay Weatherall stood up, said to the South Australian people, I've got it wrong, we need more baseload power here, my ideological pursuit of green votes in the city and of renewable power hasn't worked in my state. We need a much more balanced approach. It's Jay Weatherall who's got it wrong.
How long could it be before we see energy prices? If you're looking at clean coal and clean technologies, how many years could it be? We're talking a decade to get these up and running, because there are no solutions to reduce costs, and Andrew's evidence of that.
Well, look, we need a mixture of responses. You've heard us talk about coal, you've heard us talk about gas, and you've also heard the Prime Minister yesterday talk about storage. And as a result of his intervention, we now have ARENA and the CEFC, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, have another new round of funding of major storage capacity. Now that could be very important here in South Australia, because if you can get that wind and that solar power stored in batteries or pumped hydro or whatever the system is, then you can actually get power being generated and supplied for 24 hours a day, as opposed to what is the current situation, which is not that consistent.
Isn't it possible with those technologies, with pumped hydro and with battery storage for the renewables, that maybe we won't need coal at all?
Well, obviously over time there's a transition taking place, and we currently in Australia have about 15% of our energy being generated from renewables. Now we have a renewable energy target which will take that to 23.5% by 2020 is our goal. Now, where we've got it wrong at the state level in these Labor states is to pursue unrealistically high targets, namely 50% targets here in South Australia, a 50% target in Queensland, even though they only have 4.5% of their power coming from renewables currently, and a 40% target in Victoria. You've heard from Bill Shorten that he's jumped on the bandwagon. He has his own 50% target, which will require a $48 billion impost on consumers. That's Bill Shorten's target. And we've said no to that from the coalition at the federal level. So we understand there's an integration issue. We understand that there's a transition issue. But what we want from Alan Finkel and his committee is practical ways we can stabilise the system as fast as possible. I've outlined some of the things we've done today. We have agreed at COAG, Labor and Liberal ministers alike have agreed to a number of significant gas market reforms. That hopefully will drive down the price. It relates to the pipeline systems and the transportation of gas throughout Australia. But more needs to be done, and that's why I'm here hearing firsthand from the stakeholders, and I'll be hearing from Business SA a little bit later this afternoon.
Is converting Hazelwood an option at all to clean coal?
Well, look, we're looking at all our options, but the point is we have 24 coal-fired power stations here in Australia. 4 of those are supercritical, but we don't have any ultra supercritical. What we need is a partnership with industry and government to properly investigate these options and to ensure that we have a technology neutral approach and that we get the most reliable, affordable power as we transition to a lower emissions future. It's not our job to be ideological. It's our job to ensure that businesses like Ferguson's Australia have the lowest cost power and the most reliable power. And here in South Australia, it's been an embarrassment.
Hazelwood's not ideology, it's a dirty brown coal plant. So does that mean that it could be converted? Well,
the problem with the closure of Hazelwood was that the Labor government in Victoria tripled the coal royalties, effectively pushed them out. Now, that was 22% of the Victorian supply, but here in South Australia, you rely on brown coal power generation through the Hayward interconnector to your system here. The closure of Hazelwood is costing South Australian households up to $150 extra per year. That's how much South Australian households are going to pay for the closure of Hazelwood. So if you're a household here, particularly a low-income householder in South Australia, who pays 5 times as much of your disposable income on energy bills as a higher income earner, you're going to say, is that good for me? Is that good for my family? That I have to cut back on my groceries to pay an extra $150 because a Labor government in Victoria pushed out Hazelwood from the system? You're going to say, no, I want affordable, reliable power. That's where the rubber hits the road. That's where Jay Weatherall needs to become much more practical, needs to come clean with the South Australian public, and needs to say we need more baseload power here in order to ensure that companies like Ferguson's Australia don't have to invest their hard-earned income into backup generators and generators themselves from diesel power because they can't rely on the grid here in South Australia. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Discussion. Debate. Democracy. This is APAC.